The captain asked his name as a joke, expecting some cocky call sign from boot camp. The kid looked him straight in the eye and whispered 2 words. That made 23 hardened sailors step back in fear. Pale horse. Within seconds, every face on that deck had gone white. Within minutes, half the crew wanted him gone. And within for months, this cursed boy would become the only reason any of them were still alive. Let me tell you how it happened. Captain Marcus Brennan had commanded naval vessels for 23 years, and he'd never seen his crew go that silent that fast. The young recruit standing before him couldn't have been more than 19. Sunburned face, fresh regulation haircut, duffel bag slung over one bony shoulder like it weighed more than it should. He looked like every other green kid who'd ever shuffled onto Brennan's ship with wide eyes and shaky legs. But the moment those 2 words left his mouth, something changed. The air itself seemed to freeze. Before I tell you what the captain did next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening to this unfold. Brennan's smile died on his lips. Behind him, Master Chief Rodriguez, a man who'd survived 3 combat deployments, took an actual step backward. His coffee cup trembled in his weathered hand. The other sailors, hardened men and women who'd seen artillery fire, stood frozen. They stared at this skinny kid like he'd just announced he was carrying death itself in that duffel bag. Son, Brennan said slowly, warmth draining from his voice, I'm going to need you to explain that. Right now, the young man didn't blink. There was something in his eyes that didn't belong in a face that young, something ancient and exhausted. Something that made the hair on Brennan's arms stand up. It's what they called me, sir, he said quietly. In the town where I grew up. Rodriguez's voice came out rough. And why would anyone call a kid something like that? The recruit's jaw tightened. His shoulders sagged under invisible weight. Because everyone I ever got close to died, sir. My parents when I was 6, house fire. My foster family 2 years later, car accident. My best friend at 15, brain aneurysm in gym class. My girlfriend last summer drowned right in front of me at the beach. He said it like he was reading a weather report. Flat, factual. But his knuckles had gone bone white around his bag strap. People started saying I was cursed, that I carried death with me. They called me the pale horse like from Revelation. The 4th horseman. His voice cracked. Some wouldn't let their kids near me. Others crossed the street when they saw me coming. I couldn't make friends, couldn't exist. The deck became so quiet you could hear the ocean breathing. One of the younger sailors made the sign of the cross. Brennan felt ice spreading through his chest. He'd commanded men through rocket attacks. He wasn't superstitious. But standing there, looking at this kid who wore tragedy like a second skin, instinct whispered, send him away. Protect your crew, sir, Rodriguez said quietly, urgently. We can't take him. The crew will never. I know what you're thinking. The recruit's voice cut through like a blade, desperate now. Young, human. I know how this sounds. That's why I joined the Navy. I thought out here, surrounded by water, maybe it would stop. Maybe the pattern would break. His voice shattered. Maybe I could just be normal. Just once. There it was. The truth underneath the fear. He wasn't just cursed, he was alone. More alone than any human should be. And he'd volunteered anyway, knowing what they'd think. Because the alternative was spending his life as a ghost among the living. He thought he'd never deserve hope. But in 60 seconds, everything would change. Brennan looked at his crew. Fear, yes, but also shame. These were people who'd sworn oaths to protect the helpless. And here they were, ready to abandon a kid who'd already been abandoned by everyone. The captain made his choice. Your name, Brennan said, voice ringing clear, is Seaman Recruit Daniel Morrison. That's what we'll call you on this ship. Not Pale Horse. Not anything else. Understood. Daniel's eyes went wide. Tears gathered. Sir, you don't have to. I'm not asking. You're part of this crew now. This crew doesn't believe in curses. We believe in training, discipline, and watching each other's backs. Brennan turned to his sailors. Anyone with a problem can see me in my quarters. Otherwise, back to stations. Nobody moved. Then Rodriguez straightened, walked over, held out his hand. Welcome aboard, kid. The crew scattered, several nodding at Morrison, reluctant, uncertain, but nodding. Daniel stood there with tears streaming down his face, shaking the Master Chief's hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that never stopped shifting. That was for months ago, today. Brennan stood on that same deck, but everything had transformed. Daniel Morrison, no longer pale, no longer haunted, stood at the rail laughing with his crewmates. In 16 weeks, not a single unusual incident had occurred, no freak accidents, no deaths. But that wasn't the miracle. 3 weeks into Morrison's deployment, they'd responded to a fishing vessel distress call. Morrison volunteered first. While others hauled survivors aboard, he suddenly stopped, head cocked. "There's someone else, below deck. I can feel it." They tried to stop him. The boat was sinking. But Morrison went over anyway. He found a little girl trapped in an air pocket, hypothermic, barely conscious. The boat went under 90 seconds after he got her out. "I've been around death my whole life," he'd said later, water dripping from his hair. "I know what it sounds like when it's coming, and when someone's about to slip away." 2 months later, during a drill turned reel when a safety line snapped, Morrison spotted the falling sailor before the splash registered. His shout gave Rodriguez time to grab a life ring. They recovered Petty Officer Chen alive. "I saw the line fraying yesterday," Morrison admitted. "It looked wrong, like it was already breaking in slow motion." Then last week, Morrison noticed an engine diagnostic irregularity 3 engineers had dismissed. He insisted on inspecting it personally. They found a cracked coolant line that would have caused catastrophic failure. In 48 hours, right during a training exercise with 3 other ships in close formation, the casualties could have been devastating. The crew stopped avoiding Morrison after the first rescue, started seeking him out after the second. By the third, they called him Lucky Morrison, and the nickname stuck, erasing the old name under something bright and earned. Brennan watched his young sailor, surrounded by friends, and felt warmth bloom in his chest. He'd made thousands of decisions in 23 years, but this one, never a doubt. Because sometimes the thing people fear most in you is exactly what the world needs most from you. Sometimes the curse is just a gift nobody bothered to understand. Daniel Morrison had spent 13 years as Death's shadow, certain he was the cause. But maybe he'd been Death's student instead, learning to recognize its approach, to hear its footsteps, to read the signs everyone else missed. Maybe the pale horse hadn't been bringing death at all. Maybe he'd been running from it, and now, surrounded by people who chose to see him instead of fear him, he'd learned to turn around and stare it down. The sunset painted the ocean gold and crimson as the USS Cortez cut toward home. On deck, a young sailor laughed with his brothers and sisters in arms, finally free. Captain Brennan smiled and turned away, because kindness doesn't vanish, it waits, and it finds its way back. And sometimes, the person everyone feared would bring death turns out to be the one who teaches us all how to truly live. The ocean remembered everything from 4 months ago, the silence, the fear, the judgment. But now it carried something else, laughter. Waves against a ship full of people who'd learned that the scariest names sometimes belong to the bravest souls. If this story gave you chills, drop a comment telling me what you felt, and if you believe people deserve second chances, hit subscribe. I share these stories because they remind us what it means to be human, and I'm grateful you're here.